August 31st, 1985, the day police say pure evil was captured after a year of terror for California residents by the Night Stalker on the loose. The vicious killer who snuck through the shadows, robbing, raping, and murdering unassuming victims who he seemingly chose at random. The killer was eventually identified as Richard Ramirez, who his victims called the devil himself. After 429 days of his sick crime spree, Ramirez was finally arrested, convicted of 43 crimes, 13 of which were murders, and sentenced to death before dying of cancer in 2013. But even after his death, Ramirez's niece, Rosie, was still living with fear.
I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. My Uncle Richie was part of all of that.
Carrying the emotional burden of being molested by her uncle at just age 7. Thinking no one would believe her story, Rosie says it's a secret she kept for years, until now. Today, Rosie is here to share her story for the first time, and the co-lead investigator who brought Richard Ramirez to justice, Gil Carrillo, joins us from his home in Los Angeles. Thank you both for joining us today. I've watched this series. I have to tell you, you just don't know how to react to such evil. Nothing prepares one to see that. And Rosie, certainly nothing prepares one to live that close to it. You are actually not in the docuseries, but you came out later and told your story, giving up your anonymity after all of these years. Why now?
I reached out to Gil because he had validated me. All these years, I didn't know about those children, and the fact that they were in the documentary, I felt like he gave me validation for what I had gone through all these years of keeping it a secret. And once I did come out and my family began, I told some of my family members, when I told them, they didn't believe me. I misbehaved, I was acting out. And when I finally started to say something about what had happened to me, they did not believe me. And because they didn't believe me, I kept quiet for a long time, until the documentary came out and I found out that he had done this to other children. I reached out to Gil.
Gil, you know, that's one of the things about the documentary that struck me. When people think of the Night Stalker, they do think of those heinous murders. But it was revealed that Richard Ramirez had sexually assaulted children in some of those attacks as well. Knowing that this information reached Rosie and gave her the confidence, the courage to speak up, I'm sure you now are happy you participated in this documentary all these years later.
Almost assuredly, for us to have the ability to help somebody else out, and the feeling, the pain that one has to go through due to tragedy they suffered, if this is some way, some small way, being able to assist Rosie and anybody else who's listening, one of your viewers right now, then it's well worthwhile.
In the docuseries, it touched on some of Ramirez's background as you tracked him down and studied his profile. I thought about the fact that here you are, this hero police officer, both in the Latino community and watching this to bring him to justice. And Ramirez's father was a police officer in Mexico at one point in time.
Well, we really didn't know about his father till after the arrest. And where he was a police officer at, it really took no training, no anything. You knew somebody, you're a cop. One day you're a ditch digger, tomorrow you're a cop. It really didn't make much difference where he was from.
Does it surprise you all these years later, the fascination and the fact that this series is trending, you know, on air and people wanting to understand the why here?
This is beyond my wildest imagination. I never anticipated that it was going to reach as many people. I didn't know. I don't follow social media, so I don't know anything about trending. It was a shock to me. My kids were telling me I had to ask someone in the business, what does it mean to be trending #1 and #6 around the world? So it's opened up a wave of people trying to get in touch with me now.
One of the things I read is that the exploration of the motives still seems to be open, like the why.
Well, you know, Richard at one time asked me, he just flat out said, Gil, why do you think I am the way I am? Why do you think I did this? And I told him, I'm only a cop. I'm not a doctor. Let psychologists, psychiatrists examine you. I can't give you the answer. I have no idea why, other than personally, I believe it was a sexually driven uh, series that went on. He was deriving sexual pleasure out of it.
Rosie, in your home growing up, knowing the pain that you were hiding, how was he talked about in the house? How was he referred to amongst family members?
We always called him Richie. That's how we referred to him, or Theo Richie or Uncle Richie. During the day, he was like a regular uncle.
After Richard Ramirez was arrested and identified as the Night Stalker, how was he spoken about within the home with other family members?
They really didn't say much about it. They really didn't say much about what was going on with him. I know for some people in the family, they thought he was innocent. And understandably, because this is a family member. But others didn't quite believe that. It all really depended on whom you spoke to.
Did they try to shield it away from you because you were so young and the other younger members of the family?
Yes, they did. I know that weekend that everything had happened. They sent us on a camping trip with a family friend. And so, yes, they tried their very best to shield all of the children from this with the newspapers and everything. So a lot of the details, we were clueless about them. Like I said, I didn't know many of the details. I didn't know about the other children until the documentary.
Gil, Richard Ramirez was convicted 43 felonies. He never expressed remorse for any of the crimes. Were you surprised that he never acknowledged them?
No, it didn't surprise me. He said in the very beginning, until he was able to explain everything thoroughly to his mother, he would have to deny him and fight it in court. If he found a way to explain, then he'd go ahead and confess to everything. We did talk about the crimes a couple of times, and he would speak in the third person. That was until after his conviction. We spent 4 or 5 days with him prior to him being transported to San Quentin prison, where we talked very openly about the cases.
Rosie, did he ever acknowledge what he'd done to you, which would be incredible given no acknowledgement or remorse with all of these other crimes?
In that course of my journey, I decided that I was going to take some control and reclaim some of the control. And so what I did, I would write to him. And in one of my letters, I wrote to him because whenever he would have me perform some of these acts, I would pretend to be asleep. And I told him in my letter, you know those times when I would pretend to be, do you know those times when I would be pretending to be, did you know I was pretending to be asleep? Or something like that, I said. And then he said, in his letter, he said that yes.
You said you spent decades trying to convince your family that your abuse was real, and you finally heard your father's words. What happened?
I cried. I cried. It meant a lot to me to know that my father believed me. And it took, he saw the letter and he believed me. But there, I still saw some doubt in him. And when my father saw the series, and he told me, I believe you, I believe you, I believe you. I cried because I finally felt the sincerity of it.